I'm George McNeely. I spent many happy years in this building when some of us back there were all going to GFS, and then I moved to New York, and now I'm back. So poor Germantown's stuck with me again. So I came up with this wacky idea, so you can blame me if it's a total disaster. But I somehow doubt it will be. Because I've just been interested in observing, as having been in New York for 35 years, to see how Germantown has changed, how Northwest Philadelphia has changed and evolved from the old days. And one of the things that happens is new people move in and bring new energy and ideas. And I think Pete is a good example of that, both in terms of a business and also now a person, now that he actually lives in Germantown. So I thought it would be good to have a little Q&A here to review about the business. I mean, I always thought when I first saw the Merzbacher's bread in bakeries, I always assumed, it's been there since, the 19th century or something. You assume it's just this old business because of the logo. But it's not. So give us a quick overview of the business as it is now.
So Merzbacher's began in 2013. In my South Philly row home, and so that was about 11 years ago. And today it's about a $2 million a year company, 23 employees, make about 20 products or so, all bread, no pastries, and we're primarily a wholesale bakery. So we sell to restaurants, grocery stores, cafes, caterers. We do a little bit direct to consumer. We're at the Rittenhouse Farmers Market. You can visit our bakery, which is at Wayne Junction, and buy bread directly from us. So it's a bread bakery. So
let's go back to your life. Tell us a little, where'd you grow up, and how did you first come up with some wild idea of?
So those who have known me longest, friends from middle school, high school, I think on the surface would be shocked to hear that I turned into a bread baker. Just how did that come to be? And I think a lot of people do hear that I'm a baker. I'll meet someone at a party or a concert, and people say, "What do you do?" And I say, "I'm a baker." And it's kind of like, "Whoa, interesting." I don't really know many bakers. So it is, I think, kind of behind the question is like an acknowledgement that being an artisan bread baker is an unusual career path. Especially for someone who went to college. I did very well in college. I wasn't intending to go into an old school manufacturing business.
What did you major in?
I designed my own major. So I went to UMass Amherst and tried to drop out, actually. And my parents were not really into that idea. And it wasn't
wise of them.
Wise of them. In retrospect, I'm so grateful that they exerted their will and prevented me from doing so. But it wasn't out of lack of intellectual curiosity or anything like that. I mean, in the end, I Phi Beta Kappa, summa cum laude. I was a good student, but I just really, really wanted to integrate the practical with the kind of conceptual. And so I halfway through college, I took some time to go WOOFing, which is an acronym, Worldwide Opportunities on Organic Farms. And you work at a farm, and in exchange for labor, they provide room and board. And that really introduced me to the world of food. And when I came back, I was like, all right, I had switched majors, I don't know how many times. And so I decided that I was going to design my own major. I called it Globalization Studies. In the end, I renamed it Globalization and Entrepreneurship. And what I really wanted to do was try to understand the big picture, hence Globalization Studies. It's just clear, when I was in school, 2007 to 2011, that the world was changing rapidly. Ecological change on a global scale. I had just, come of age in the 2008 financial crisis, which is a global event. Technology, so on and so forth. So I really want to kind of think big picture and understand the large forces at play. But there was also globalization and entrepreneurship, which was how do I kind of marry what I understand kind of in the abstract with where I am at the time, Amherst. And so I think the journey to bread, once you realize it is kind of my response to what I've learned about the bigger picture, I think it starts to make a little bit more sense. So as a student at UMass, again, no plans to go into bread, but I wanted to be cool. So I would take the bus from Amherst to Northampton, where the Hungry Ghost bakery was. And if you brought a loaf of Hungry Ghost bread to a potluck, you were the man. And so I'd usually get 2 or 3 loaves and a couple cookies. And by the time I got back to Amherst, one of the loaves would be half eaten, 1 or 2 of the cookies demolished, and then 1 or 2 loaves for the potluck. But again, this is just kind of like a dot, like a point that later would become something, but at the time it was just a ritual. I'm going to go to Northampton, get some bread, and come back. But after I graduated, I did some nonprofit work. I did a lot of urban farming, and ultimately was trying to find kind of my canvas. An artist needs to concentrate their work on something kind of small and focused. And I, again, was just really searching for something to do that would kind of marry the conceptual, abstract, big picture stuff with the stuff on the ground. There's this quote I like by Barbara Kingsolver, something to the effect of food is a rare arena in which like the ethical choice is also one that makes you groan with pleasure. But what I mean by that, or what she means by that, is when you do the right thing in food, buy from a local bakery, get sustainable meat, locally grown produce, you don't have to do it to just be a good person. It just tastes a lot better. And having done work in the nonprofit world, where some people, not all, but seem to kind of make themselves miserable by doing good work, I was like, God bless those people, but I want to have fun along the way. And I think another quote, a revolution without dancing is a revolution not worth having. So grown with pleasure, dance, whatever, eat, drink, be merry, that was kind of my vibe. So I moved to Philly and I got a job.
Wait, what brought you here?
Urban farming. I got a grant as an undergraduate to study urban farming because I was running a program in Springfield, Massachusetts, teaching young adults who were working towards their GED, kind of high school diploma equivalency, some like job readiness skills. So I would install gardens throughout Springfield and involve youth in the process. But Springfield didn't have too much urban agriculture, so I applied for this grant to travel the country, visit different cities, see what different cities were doing around sustainable agriculture in cities. I went to Vancouver, Seattle, Portland, Oakland, San Francisco, Milwaukee, Chicago, New York, all over. And when I visited Philadelphia, I couch surfed, which is kind of like Airbnb, but like in an alternative Airbnb. You stay on someone's couch, the rest is details. And I stayed with this guy, Chris, who was a bartender, and I just had so much fun with Chris that, again, I think this is a common theme. I like to have fun. And so I stayed with Chris for a couple weeks. Again, no plans on coming back. But after I finished all my grant research and kind of put the gardening projects to bed for a little while, I was just at a crossroads, and I was like, I really need a canvas to focus. I had a blast in Philly. I'm going to stay with Chris again, and I'm going to try to find a job. So I got a job at Tallulah's Garden, which is a really nice restaurant in Center City. And the motivation, again, is like, you go to college, you learn how to write essays, you learn how to like integrate or differentiate, intense math problems, and you come away. A lot of people change the world through their intellect, and I just knew I wasn't going to be one of those people. So I had to learn practical skills, and I figured I'd get paid to learn how to cook. And so while at Tallulah's Garden, I was getting paid to learn how to cook.
So you were in the kitchen, not in the front.
I was in the kitchen.
Okay.
And it's a miracle that they hired me. Stories about my interview, but irrelevant for this conversation. I failed the interview pretty miserably, but they still hired me. But while I was there, having had experience designing my own major, I kind of had this approach where I was like, all right, I want to be here, but I am here. What do I need to do to get from A to B? And so I was like, I would learn practical skills on cooking food. And while I was there, I learned how to cut up a chicken, make pasta, make all the mother sauces, prep vegetables, do a lot of stuff, but they didn't teach me how to make bread. And that was kind of on my self-designed curriculum for learning about food. I was not a great line cook. But when I started to make bread, the chefs were really encouraging. They were like, that's really good bread. And so I would make all this bread, and I got infected with the bug to make bread. I was encouraged to do it. I liked doing it. I ended up with so much extra bread, and word got out that I had all this extra bread that people would have parties, they would ask for it. I had a group of friends who ran this bulk buying food collective. They started buying the bread, and because I really knew nobody when I moved to Philadelphia, bread kind of became my way of connecting with people. Yeah. Here I am.
Here's an early shot of himself. So you started making the bread in your own kitchen, and you were still working at Toulouse Garden.
Yep.
But you're starting to find buyers for the bread.
Yes.
And so we're sort of gradually scaling up.
Yep. I think the origin was definitely not to start a business. I did not begin with a business plan. It was one of my kind of self-deprecating mantras is fire, aim, ready, which gets me in trouble at the bakery quite often. But the point, I think you can intuit what it means. Instead of really preparing and taking your time and gathering your thoughts and methodically approaching a plan, I just go for it. And then as I'm doing it, I'm kind of thinking what am I doing, and why am I doing this?
Obviously, you have sort of an analytical mind. I mean, the way you talked about learning the different types of cooking and you were in the plan of A to B and all that kind of stuff. I mean, you were sort of had perspective on while you were doing these activities, thinking, where does it go? I mean, that's relatively unusual for your average 22-year-old.
I have a lot of energy. I have a ton of energy and a lot of passion, and so I think there's opposite forces at play. I have the fire, aim, ready effort, and then I also have my dad's voice in my head, which is do all the research, be methodical, obsess over the details. So I think if left to my own devices, I would just go all out all the time without any structure. But that's why you go to school and learn how to overcome some of your instincts, because they can be good, but not always. But I think in general, the balancing opposites is something that has benefited me a lot. To be creative, but not at the expense of practicality, or to be innovative, but not at the expense of tradition, or to be kind of rebellious, but not at the expense of being community oriented, and so on and so forth. So I think you're right to observe the analytical mindset, but it's definitely kind of tied to a more impulsive, intuitive set of instincts.
Apollonian and Dionysian.
I also am just interested, the idea, when I graduated from school way back in the Middle Ages, this is before the internet, nobody thought of starting their own business. I'm looking at some of our, Kathy's shaking her head. It was just not considered to be an option. And I'm just interested, the whole idea of apps, the internet, it completely changed the perspective of how kids kind of engage with the world. Nobody at our GFS ever thought was saying I'm gonna create my own
We're all going to go into systems of some sort and be part of it. So I think you're representative of a whole shift in the thinking.
Definitely. I think but behind this whole business is a question of like how much of what is has to be. And so I think, what's motivated me throughout this whole project of running a company is, the bread is the vehicle. I happen to be a baker, but really I'm just kind of like, but could you just do it? Kind of whatever that is, which in my case right now is, could you make a delicious, approachable, kind of inventive artisan bread that, subtly new, but also approachable, and, while also paying people a reasonable wage and providing a good, you go to college and you learn about all the world's problems, and then you're like, well, does it have to be that way? Could it be better? And so this project is a way of me being like, do businesses have to be problematic? Like, could they be good?
And so, all right, so back to you. So where did this building come into the picture?
So I'm fire aim readying all the way. I'm making bread, I'm selling it, I'm registering a URL, phillybread.com. I need a project, a name.
So that was the original name
The original
of the business.
Of the project.
The project.
Because and this is just going back for
Your
years.
kitchen table.
I have always had projects going on throughout my life that involve some money. I mean, I could go on and on. I've always just had something kind of creative going on that involved a little bit of money, but they were never businesses. I was never like, I'm going to be a professional yard sale coordinator. I organized a lot of music events in high school. I was never like, I'm going to be an event planner. It was just like, I'm doing it. I have to, and so, my roommates were very tolerant in the early days, but I broke the oven. There was sacks of flour everywhere. The dining room table often was just like an array of bread, and they were supportive, but like it was clear I had to get out. This would be a recurrent theme. So I found this kitchen space in West Philly called the Center for Culinary Enterprises, which you rent kitchen space by the hour. It was brand new when I started renting there, but after like 1 or 2 bakes there, it was like $40 an hour, and bread is a very time-intensive thing. And I was like, I am never gonna break even if I'm spending this much. So there was a local entrepreneur, Tom McCusker, who was at the time running a taco company, and I asked him for advice. He was real scrappy, and he was like, you should just go to every pizzeria in West Philly and ask if you can use their ovens when they're closed. So I literally went to every pizzeria in West Philly, and one dude, Mohammed, was hungry for a little extra cash, and for $100 a week, I would rent his pizzeria. He'd close at 11 p.m., reopen at like 11 a.m., and overnight I would do all my baking. And by this point, I am obsessed. Like, I'm sleeping on sacks of flour in the pizzeria with my sleeping bag, just all in. And at that point, I'm like, all right, like I really love this, and I'm starting to be like, this is a micro business. I'm not sure if I'm going to do this forever, but I really like this. And so I started what originally my business plan was inspired by the world of sustainable agriculture that I kind of was coming from at UMass. I started with a bread CSA, kind of like a farm CSA, where people would give me $25 a month. Once a week, we would meet up. I would give them a loaf of bread. Again, new to Philly, don't know anyone, building relationships, but pretty quickly realized that delivering bread on a bike trailer to people, it just didn't make any business sense. So I started wholesaling. Mariposa, food co-op in West Philly, Green Line Cafe, Local 44, Weaver's Way, were some early businesses who were like, we'll buy your bread.
Well, I think when we talked before, I was just interested, a lot of us are members of Weaver's Way, so it's just interesting how Weaver's Way was an important early buyer.
Crucial.
And how did that
them?
happen? It just,
well,
like, there you were, some guy with...
Well, Weaver's Way, God bless them, I think like literally anyone could walk in the door with a food product, and they are so community oriented, they would probably take it. They're just that generous. But my entrance to Weaver's Way was describing my time as an urban farmer. When I visited Philly for the first time, I visited the Weaver's Way farm at Saul High School, and I met their farmer, Nina Berryman, and she was really cool. We connected, and so I kind of had an in. I knew Nina. She was able to refer me to Christina Walker, who was the bread buyer at Chestnut Hill, and Molly, who was the bread buyer, I think, in Mount Airy. And so that was my in. I baked the bread. I rode my bike from 48th and Spruce with the trailer to 30th Street, locked up the whole situation with the tote you see there, took the regional rail out to Chestnut Hill and Carpenter Lane, had my little sales meetings, and they liked the bread and they started buying it. But the product that they're actually most interested in was this kind of scrap piece of dough that I would bring with me. It was a piece of sourdough that I cooked in a cast iron skillet with a little bit of clarified butter, and it's now called the Philly muffin.
But we'll get there.
We'll get there. And people just kept over and over again being like, "What is that?" It's the Philly muffin. So I got in with Weaver's Way, all these different places, and kind of by this point I'm like, I'm going to try to make this work. Feel free to jump in at any point, but I ultimately again got kicked out. So I took over the row home that I was in South Philly, got kicked out of there because I just took over, and then moved into the pizzeria. And originally it was like, I'll be here 1 or 2 days a week doing this bread CSA thing, and then pretty quickly I switched to a wholesale model. Was baking there every day of the week. Grew the business a lot, kind of took over his pizzeria. So he was like, you gotta get out of here. So I got it was just super serendipitous. I got kicked out. I reached out to everybody I knew of like, I have a business, I have customers, I'm losing my bakery space, I'm kind of sunk right now. And one person, a guy named Ilan Silverman, who was one of the very first employees at Metropolitan Bakery, was like, I once bought a wooden table, like a bakery table, from a space that appeared to be a vacant bakery in North Philly. Do you want me to reach out to this guy from Craigslist who sold me the table? And I'm like, yes. So
that is a very tenuous.
And so I went up there, and it's this place here, 4905 North 5th Street in Albany, and it is outfitted with like imported French baking equipment, like 3-phase industrial power, spiral mixers. It was a dream, and I was a dream to him too. It was vacant. There were some dudes making African bean pies on the second floor, and for $600 a month, he rented me the bakery, and so I packed up my bags.
What year was that?
This was probably like late fall 2013.
Okay.
And I moved into the bakery.
Literally yourself.
Yes.
You were sleeping on the flour stacks again.
Yep.
All right.
But this was the move that made it possible. Like up until then, it was a micro business. It was a fun project. Money was involved, but it wasn't a real business. When I moved here and I saw this equipment, I realized like this is a game changer. Most people would have to take out a big loan to fit out a facility like this, and it was already fit out. I mean, there was a lot wrong with this facility, but like still a dream come true, and it ultimately allowed me to get to 1 million in sales. And the final year at this bakery, when we were doing 1 million in sales, was insane. Truly.
But you were used to that.
It runs my blood.
Yeah, clearly.
100%. Chaos and order, something like that.
Right, there you go.
Yeah.
So, and then, so you basically outgrew this space. And
Yes.
then how did you find the space, your next space?
So began just reaching out to my network. Had to start reaching out probably in like 2017. I moved into this facility in Albany in 2013, late 2013. But by 2017, the choice was, I was at a crossroads. Like, I've taken this as far as I could take it. I'm outgrowing this space, and but there won't be another vacant bakery like waiting for me. And at this point,
done that one.
I had used up all my luck several times over. The old facility, there was like some pretty intense fires there. I got electrocuted to death. There was just so I got robbed. It was just like one near-death experience after another. And so I got to the point where I was like, I have two choices. I could kind of wipe the flour off my shirt and say, like, I did it. I started a small business. I didn't incur a lot of debt. I did something kind of cool, and I'm going to kind of transition to something else. Or I could keep going and double down on what at this point is just my whole world. And I decided to double down. So I started looking at a lot of buildings, was ultimately introduced to Ken Weinstein, who owns a lot of property in the Northwest Philly. And by the time I met him, I had looked at a lot of buildings and met a lot of sleazy landlords. And I knew a lot of people who knew Ken, and people were like, Ken is the real deal. Ken is honest. He's a businessman, but he is honest, and he will do a good job, and he is trustworthy. And so this building, the one I ultimately moved into, it was the right size, it was the right shape, it was accessible because it's at Wayne Junction, so employees could get there. He offered to finance the fit out, just turn it into kind of a vanilla box, build an office, put in floor drains, upgrade the electric, put in sprinklers, so many things, garage doors, HVAC, and it was just an offer that was too good to refuse. So he did the build out. PIDC, the Philadelphia Industrial Development Corporation, gave me a really substantial loan to buy all the equipment. And by this point,
so it was a business startup loan. I mean, from their perspective.
Yeah, and because the old facility was so low overhead, we were profitable for the last couple of years at the old bakery. And so I had tax returns that were showing, I mean, a small but like growing and modestly successful company. So I was able to get financing and signed the lease in, I think, January 2018 for this building. Did about a year and 3 months of build out, and
while also managing the business.
Still
in the other spot.
And on March 1st, 2019, we did our first bake in this facility, and it was really like a light switch. Like the last day of February, we were in Albany. I rented trucks. I was hauling equipment overnight. The next day, we were baking here. So that was about 5 years ago.
2019, good timing.
Yeah.
Given other factors.
Yeah.
All right, we don't need to go into all of that because I want to get to, we wanted to talk a little bit about the bread itself.
Yes.
So,
the science and art.
So that's what we call it. Yeah, the ancient mysteries of perfect sourdough. So now you're going to get some of the inside scoop here. So Pete says 4 factors. So we have a slide for each of the factors.
Yep.
So
the sourdough is the bread that I fell in love with. This is the loaves that I took to potlucks in Western Mass from Hungry Ghost. It's really simple bread, and this is the bread that for most of human history has been made. Commercial yeast is a relatively new invention, early 20th century. And so sourdough bread is how bread has been made for a really long time. If you leave flour and water kind of in a slurry out in a warm environment, you'll start to see little bubbles form, and you start kind of cultivating that culture of yeasts and bacterias, and you kind of start, giving it very kind of favorable conditions to get the right yeasts and the right bacteria to start to flourish. And that slurry of now kind of cultured dough becomes the source of leavening in the product. So you're not leavening the dough with a commercial yeast, you're leavening the dough with wild yeast. It is ultimately the same when you buy commercial yeast. It's Saccharomyces cerevisiae, which if you do like a lab test on sourdough, you will find the monoculture of Saccharomyces cerevisiae, which you buy, that same strain exists in the sourdough that you've cultivated, but the sourdough that you cultivate also has a couple other types of yeast, a couple other types of bacteria, and that kind of complex culture is one of the things that makes sourdough so unique. It's
What, in terms of taste, or in terms of nutritional value, etc.?
Definitely taste. Without a doubt, it changes the taste. It gives it a unique texture. Sourdough bread does have a subtle but noticeably distinct texture. The nutrition, I'm not a nutritionist. I don't want to make any health claims, but the kind of popular knowledge is that sourdough is better for you because it's always kind of a fact that blows my mind, but like, flour is crushed up grass seed. That's what it is. Wheat is grass. Corn is grass. And so if you take grass seed and you grind it up and add water to it, like, that's not food. You can't live on that, but you can live on bread. Here I am. You know, I eat a lot of bread.
In the broadest sense of living on it.
So that's something that's interesting. The difference between gruel, made of ground up, which has less nutritional value. I mean, when you say you can't live on it, are you saying like we actually can't survive?
I mean, well,
is it the same thing, or is it something about the process of the making of the bread that produces?
Yeah, it's both the pre-digestion of the grains and the heat. So I mean, like gruel, you can't eat on that, but once you put heat to it, I mean, that's one of the fires, one of the things that helped our brain grow so big, because we started cooking food and making more of the nutrients available. And so once you cook gruel, I suppose you could live on it, but it's certainly less nutritious than what happens when you start adding kind of the chemical and biological components of bread making, where you are, I mean, there's a lot of science in bread making. You don't need to know all the science to be a good baker, but behind the scenes, yeasts and bacteria are doing and enzymes are doing a lot of really cool things to the dough that ultimately make the nutrients in that crushed up grass seed available, and
more available, or easily available to human stomachs.
So it's like by the time you get to it, it's already, some of the digestion has already been done by microorganisms, and that does make it, supposedly, because I think nutrition science in my 35 years has changed a lot. Margarine was the name of the game when I was growing up, and not so much anymore.
So that's the first one. So the second?
So the wild starter is what you see on the screen here. You can see the little bubbles on the side there, and that is just little pockets of air that are being trapped by the gluten network. And so every day, twice a day at the bakery, we feed the starter. It gets kind of stinky and smelly, which tells you that it needs to be kind of restarted. So twice a day we feed it flour and water, keep it young and active and fresh. It's kind of like stoking, almost like adding wood to a fire. Eventually it'll just kind of burn itself out. So we're always feeding it fresh water, fresh flour, and keeping it really vigorous. And when you add that vigorous, young, active starter to a dough, that ultimately leavens it. And so there's a lot of confusion. A lot of products out there say sourdough on the label. Some of it is naturally leavened without commercial yeast, only the wild starter. But a lot of it has this wild starter kind of as like a little symbolic kind of gesture, but it still has a lot of commercial yeast in it. But the sourdough that is on the table back there is leavened with exclusively wild starter, no commercial yeast. I don't have a problem with commercial yeast. It's a really amazing invention, but I think some of the best breads are straight sourdough.
Straight sourdough. Okay.
So one of the reasons why commercial yeast took off is you can make bread rise so much faster with the inclusion of commercial yeast. And as a businessman myself, time is money. It's really hard to tell a customer, I know you want the bread tomorrow, but it takes a long time to make. It would be, there's a strong incentive to be like, you want it tomorrow? I can get it to you. I'm just going to put a bunch of yeast in it. It will rise quickly, get it done. But when you eat bread like that, it's serviceable, but that bread is kind of a innocuous transportation vessel for condiments and proteins.
Innocuous transportation vessel for condiments and proteins. That's good.
Yeah. And it's fine. I mean, like I grew up eating that
it's
bread.
Functional.
It's functional. And bread has to be functional. So I think to diminish or like insult a bread for being like just functional is unfair, because bread has always been, frankly, like a simple transportation vessel for a lot of other things. But bread can be a great pleasure, where the bread itself can just be delicious. And you can only achieve that depth of flavor through a handful of things, most notably through slow fermentation. And you are making, the sugars available. You are building up some acids in the dough and making the nutrients more available. So the sourdough that we make is about a 24-hour process. The bread that you will eat tonight was baked this afternoon and mixed yesterday midday. So it's about a 24-hour process, which by industrial standards is extraordinarily slow.
What are we looking at? What's that image?
That's yeast.
Well, that's yeast. Okay.
Yep.
All right. And the final factor.
Skillful handling. The sourdough that is back there is actually a relatively new product for us, because one of the hardest things, when I fell in love with making bread and starting the company, it was, my output, my product was a loaf. But now that I'm running a company, my output, my product is, in a way, a company that produces a loaf. And so you're only as good as your worst baker, so to speak. And making sourdough is really difficult. You would, a manufacturing consultant or a mentor might say, like, you really need to dial everything in and make everything super exact and precise, and how many minutes does this dough mix for, and how many hours does this dough ferment for, and so on and so forth. But I always say that the dough is the boss, or the bread is the boss. So if a mixer comes to me or a baker comes to me and says, like, Pete, what time do I cut out the dough? In so many words, it's like, have you asked the dough yet? Have you felt the dough? I don't know. Skillful handling means that, like, you have to have a team of bakers who can cultivate like a sensory, tactile intelligence, and with their hands and their smell determine when the dough is ready to be processed. Because with commercial yeast, you can add a lot of yeast and be like, it'll be a very strong dough. It will rise predictably. But the amount of yeast that is in the sourdough starter that you use to leaven the bread, at different points in its maturity, it has different amounts of yeast. And the amount of yeast that's in the starter affects the speed at which it ferments, and so on and so forth. And you can do a lot of things to get it more exact, but it's really difficult, borderline impossible to make it an exact science. And so you have to have, kind of an intuition for the dough and a team that can do that.
Well, we're going to skip over that one. We'll come back to that. But so, speaking of the team.
Well, two people from the team are here, Ethan Garrity and Aubrey Fink. So I would say that like my proudest accomplishment at the bakery arguably would be building a team that is extraordinary. I had today we were a little short staffed, so my former production manager Alberto came in to cover a shift, and after his shift he was like, "Man, you have a really incredible team," which felt great. So we have 23 people. That includes bakers, mixers, shapers, bakers. It includes packers, drivers, cleaners, an administrator. Aubrey does creative work, graphic design, marketing, digital work. I hope the team will grow over time. But it's pretty cool to work with people who kind of start filling in your gaps. I'm kind of a passionate, wild and crazy, a true entrepreneur. I can bring things from 0 to 1. I can look at a blank page and get something on there and make it work. But now I have people who are like, we don't know how to get things from 0 to 1, but we can, hand us the baton and we'll take it from here. Yeah.
Well, certainly when Loretta and I, we're almost done. We only got one more slide. But anyway, when I came up with the wacky idea that you were going to donate, I think it was last year, to a historic Germantown auction, as a site visit, a behind the scenes visit. And Loretta quite sensibly said, well, we can't just do that without going to visit. So I arranged for Loretta and I to come down last year so we could have, and it was fascinating to come and see the facility. And one of the things I came away with was the sense of the kind of collegiality in the staff. I mean, I kept thinking, oh, they're just smiling because he warned them to smile because it's a tour. So then I would be off in one area and I'd sort of turn around to see, are they still smiling over there? Are they still talking happily while they're doing their work? And they seem to be legitimately, people seem to be happy and comfortable with what they're doing, which is unusual in this world of isolation and web everything. So.
It has, to be honest, it has not always been that way.
No, I'm sure.
I have learned so many hard lessons on people who didn't deserve to be the subject of my learning. Ultimately, almost everyone on that screen, I still have a relationship with. They may not all work at the company, but I know all the fact that I was able to call in my old production manager and ask him to cover a shift today, and he was, with a smile, like, I'll be there. I think does point to the collegiality of the company, which is great. Makes it worth it.
All right. So just in interest of time, I skipped over the Philly muffin. So maybe in questions we can go back because it's my favorite thing. That we're just going to go. I mean, I think the motto. And what it means to you. I mean, what are you saying about yourself and the world? It's just sort of in a wrap up.
Yeah, I mean, the mission of the company, and it's always difficult to kind of distill it into a pithy mission statement. I'm always workshopping it, but it's in so many words to nourish community and foster connections through the love of food, there's a bit of a pun in bread to share. It's BREAD to share, like the leavened bread that we've been talking about to share, but also BRED to share, which is kind of my ethos. Like I can't help it. I just have to be creating, and I have to be sharing what I'm creating with people. And so I think that's it. Through sharing my creation, I have built an amazing network in Philadelphia. I didn't know anyone when I came to Philadelphia, like truly nobody, other than the guy who I couch surfed with. And through baking, I have, and sharing what I made, I have made so many friends, built so many connections, and it becomes a two-way street. You know, I'm offering bread, people are offering what they do, and there's kind of a magic when you start kind of sharing your love with people, and they kind of share theirs with you. A certain magic kind of starts happening, and a community starts forming, and I think there's kind of no end to where that can go. So BRED, to share, is really kind of the better version of it.
Okay. Thank you. Excellent. We're delighted that you're right here in Germantown, of all places in the world.